Hello again. I would like to talk a little bit more about being transgender. And today I want to focus in on my experiences with the Denton County Court System, as well as the experiences Sandra had with the Denton County Court System, and why there's such a, what I call an injustice for people who are transgender, especially in Texas. When I was in college, I was in the process of changing over my entire life, and that includes changing out your documentation, from driver's license to social security cards, college IDs, you name it. Everything's got to be switched over. And in order to do this, you need to have your name legally changed. Well, I've never done anything legal before, so I went to being a broke college student, I went to a pro bono service in Denton, and they basically made a name change petition form. And I basically filled it out with my name, my address, my reason for name change, my sex and all that. And I filled it out appropriately. I put my sex as female. Now, when I went to the court, I didn't have any issues with the court clerk or anything like that. And when I went in front of the judge changed my name legally without any problem. No balk, no nothing. My given name, my birth given name, could be, it's kind of ambiguous as to male or female, but my middle name was definitely a male name. And still, the judge had no issue with changing my name. And the documentation I provided, i.e. my driver's license, had the gender marker as male as well. And I was changing my name to a distinctly female name. So, several years later, Sandra went basically the same route I did. I helped her out, and she filled out the same exact form for petition of name change, and she provided the same documentation. She went to the same courthouse, but she got a different judge. The judge, I was there, in support for Sandra, and the judge looked over the paperwork, and I could tell with her demeanor that it was not going to go good. It was not going to go well. So the judge retreated to her chambers briefly, and then she came back out, and she basically, paraphrasing, said, paraphrasing to Sandra, "I'm denying your name change because I don't feel you've been completely honest with who you are." And Sandra was very emotionally fragile, and that pretty much just broke her. I mean, she broke down in court, and I basically had to help her out of the courtroom. And I couldn't believe that her name change was declined under the same exact circumstances, same courthouse. And that's when I really understood how the law is interpreted, and that a judgment is nothing more than an opinion. I was fortunate that I got a judge that approved it, and she was unfortunate that she had a terrible judge. It's not having a simple name change for being transgendered is very crucial for our existence. Getting a job, for instance, if the name doesn't match the way you present yourself, it can present a whole lot of difficulty just to find employment. And I don't think judges understand that. I don't think the law understands that. And there's no consideration given for that. Transgender people don't change their sex or their gender because they're running from something or because they're hiding anything. They're trying to match who they are. And she had a clean record, and I had a clean record as well. So it was just the conservative opinion that handed down a bad decision to Sandra. A few years later, Sandra and I would have another go with Denton County, and this time it was a bad situation. Like any couple, we had our fights, and unfortunately, she had gotten physical with me, and unfortunately, there was a person who witnessed it at our apartment and called the police. You know, long story short, I wound up getting a small little black eye, and the cops were called, and I told the cops I don't want any charges pressed. I want to decline any charges. And I told I told the police about Sandra's situation, that she's emotionally fragile and she can't handle this. And they said, well, this is up to the county to decide. And I didn't know the implications at the time, but ultimately what I and her family members tend to believe is that the courts, the probation that she got on because of the fight, broke her and pushed her to commit suicide. So, you know, we spent a couple days apart after the fight. We spent a couple days apart, and we made amends, and she came back, and I told her that I'm going to support her through this, and that I'm going to go to the necessary parties and tell them I don't want to press charges. And when the paperwork came in for her appearance to court, I found out who the prosecuting attorney was, and his name is Paul Johnson of Denton County. I believe that's his name, is Paul Johnson. And I met face to face with him, and I looked him in the eye and I said, look, Sandra can't handle this. Given her mental condition, this is going to break her. And I said, I want the charges dropped. And basically, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. He would look away. He was a coward. I'm sorry to say, he was just a coward. Well, I'm sorry, but when it's a domestic family violence, it's the state has to prosecute no matter what. And right there, it told me, you know, I didn't make the argument at the time, but how can it be a family violence, a domestic assault, when Texas does not recognize any gay marriage or anything like that? So I left there very frustrated, and I made my point across to these people that this is going to be devastating to her. Sandra was given a court-appointed attorney, and when I met with him and I said, look, I want the case dropped. Well, we can't do it. It's up to the state. And I asked him, well, how can it be a family assault or a domestic violence when Texas doesn't recognize us as a couple? Well, his response was to the effect that the laws are written so broadly and interpreted so liberally that anybody living in one domicile can be considered a family. And the repercussions of having this on her record, having a family assault charge, it sticks with your record. It doesn't get expunged. And she couldn't, and I couldn't afford a lawyer. She was doing the best she could with what she was given by the court, attorney. And off the record, the court-appointed attorney said, if you guys are going to fight like this, don't call 911. And this court-appointed attorney, his name was Fred Marsh. Fred Marsh of Denton, Texas. So I even went so much to Mr. Marsh to have an affidavit of non-prosecution signed and presented to them. And I did that. And it was to no avail. They still went ahead with charging her and going to court. And she wound up going to, I think his name is Jim Crouch, was the presiding, Judge Jim Crouch, County Criminal Court No. 1 of Denton County, Texas. And I don't know if they did their due diligence understanding her condition of being transgendered and her past mental health issues. But they slapped her with a lot of public service, anger management, and all these fines, and she could barely hold a job. And you know, there were silver hearings after the case, after the court decision, as to whether or not, you know, what type of job she had. Fortunately, the state of Texas showed her mercy, and her charge was just reduced to regular assault. Which, this whole situation just, it's terrible when you think about how she was jerked around and how my wishes were not taken, and how her mental health and her state was not taken into consideration. So she was put on probation, and Sandra was a habitual procrastinator, and last summer she was coming up on a brick wall of getting her money paid and her probation's done and all that. And I reminded her over and over again, I said, look, I'm going to help you pay your fines and all that. It's just up to you to go get the probation. And she had went to her probation officer the week before she committed suicide. And I don't know what happened in that conversation, but when she came back that next day from that thing, she asked me if she loved me, and I said, yeah, I love you. And then a couple of days later, I came home and I found her dead on our apartment floor from suicide, you know? So that was our experience with the Denton County system. And I really felt like, my subjective opinion is that the system failed her terribly. They're more interested in, my opinion, collecting fees and fines and bolstering the prosecution record. And I cannot, this is not justice. I just cannot feel this was justice. And there needs to be awareness made that this incident happened, and no one seems to really care too much, you know, except the people who are affected by her death, I and her family. On a side note with her name change, Sandra wound up going to Collin County, which was the next county east of Denton, and on the first try, she wound up getting her name changed without any issue at all. And it just goes to show you the inconsistencies of name change, the inconsistencies in the law in general. You know, it's so subjective. And when these judges deal with name changes for transgender people, they really need to understand the consequences a name change means. Thank you for your time, and I will be making more videos in the future.